Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Tuesday, February the 18th, 2025, and today we're going to talk about making lettuce mix efficiently, leaf mold in the garden, but like the good kind, and raising beds on clay soil to avoid poor drainage. So let's do it. All right, well, welcome in Tuesday family. We are here in Kentucky, at least, looking at a heavy winter storm here tonight to throw on top of the heavy winter flooding that we've had this week. So some areas got 7 inches of rain over this weekend, and we're expecting 6 inches or more of snow. Rivers are dangerously high, and the temperatures over the next few days will not get anywhere near above freezing. Thousands are still without power. Our town is fine, and our farm is fine. We're kind of in a high spot, but Eastern Kentucky has been hit really hard again, though. So anyway, have those folks in your thoughts and prayers and hearts and anywhere else you can put them this week, because it's just really rough out there. I'll post some links for how to kick in a few bucks in the show notes. Otherwise, it's just cold and wet here. I'm slowly working on our taxes, so that's fun. I'm starting those tomatoes today that I talked about yesterday. February, you are just an odd cold beast sometimes with all these weird things that you have to do in this month. All right, so I had some YouTube questions I wanted to get to from our super thanks, which is an option on YouTube where you can kick in a couple bucks to say thanks, I guess. Now, Patreon is where I will definitely answer every question that you put in there. But when I get a chance, I will try to occasionally get to the super thanks questions that we get here on YouTube out of appreciation for you all, because I do appreciate that. It helps keep this thing going. Maybe a monthly Super Tuesday or something. Anyway, we greatly appreciate those. And so this question came from at Brittany McPherson 8804, who wrote, quote, thanks for all the tips. Would love for you to do an episode on how to prep loose leaf lettuce for sale. Live in Colorado and try to do 2 to 3 rounds of cut and come again to maximize the season and our small space. But harvest, washing, and packing is crushing me time and energy wise. Help. End quote. Okay, love this question, Brittany, and super thanks to you. So we do tons of lettuce mix on our farm, literally tons of it, and it is a lot of work. The first step to efficient lettuce mix production that we found starts at planting. Make sure your spacing is good, or your germination technique is really strong to ensure that the growth is even and there are not gaps in production. If you're having to walk around to find the biggest heads or densest areas to cut, that's going to slow harvest down a ton. And believe me, it happens sometimes. It's just going to happen, but you try and minimize that. Like with anything in farming, the solution starts at the beginning. I mean, you could even say that the solution starts at soil preparation. You have to give the lettuce somewhere it wants to grow. That doesn't sound like it's your issue so much, but it is good for everyone to keep in mind. Also, keeping debris and bugs out as it grows will help speed up the washing part tremendously. Our biggest bottleneck is bugs like spiders and ladybugs. Row cover can help, but also you have to be careful taking the row cover off and putting it back on. That's how we often get dirt and debris from the paths into the lettuce mix. It just lands there from pulling that row cover on and off. Leaves are the worst. Leaves in your lettuce mix are harder to get out than anything else. So you try and avoid putting leaves anywhere around where you're doing lettuce mix. Next, at harvest, every step matters. And I mean every physical, literal step you take, from finding the knives to cutting the lettuce. Take multiple bins to the field with you for every harvest, how many ever you'll need, preferably, but at least a few. Buy a harvest cart or dedicate a wheelbarrow to hauling them out. Travel back and forth the least amount that you can. Then, for washing, a bubbler can help to separate debris and bugs and that sort of stuff. Some folks say they do not wash their lettuce at all, and I envy them. It is too wild here to get away with that. We do 2 wash tanks. So basically we rinse in one tank and then we move it to another tank to kind of just do a second rinse and check for bugs and any other debris. I do wish our tanks were a little bit bigger. They're kind of, they limit how much we can do at a time. The larger the tank or the tub, the more volume at once. So that can be helpful as long as the size and shape doesn't make it difficult and slow for you to reach to the middle of it and get the lettuce out. Then we let's sort of let it drip dry for a couple minutes, followed by a spin dry for 1.5 minutes in our sort of makeshift salad spinner. Then we pack the lettuce under an additional light. I find light makes a huge difference in speed. If it's too dark, it's hard to pack efficiently and ensure the quality. Also music, gotta have a little fun while you're packing. Producing cut lettuce is a slow process, thus the reason you should charge a premium for cut mix. And you should essentially just charge more for more packing, i.e. if you are doing lots of little bags or clamshells versus larger bags, make sure you are covering that labor cost. When our retailers want small bags, like a third of a pound or a quarter of a pound or whatever, versus bulk, like several pounds, they pay the bulk price plus 25 cents per bag. That way, I can justify the labor a little bit more. Anyway, I hope there was something helpful in there. Up next, we'll get a Patreon question on raising beds to defeat poor drainage. BRB.
So you turned the sun away. How could you be so cruel? Ooh, hey. You wrap the moon in ice. That's not nice. Not nice.
Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by GrowSmart. Curious if your soil will be ready for planting this spring? GrowSmart can help you find out with their at-home soil tests. They'll ship it right to your door. Just send it back with your prepaid shipping and you'll have your lab results in just 2 business days. Their reports are simple with tailored seasonal recommendations for fertilizers and amendments. Order now at growsmart.com and use the code DAILY for 10% off. That's DAILY. Begin your soil prep now for a great spring with GrowSmart. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere, like super thanks, obviously, but I will always get to your Patreon questions now. Today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Perfect Frog Name, who writes, quote, "Hi, we're dealing with clay soil, beds that have spread out and are 2 to 4 inches high. Poor rain/flood/drainage management. We've ended up tilling almost every spring and never managed to add more than a couple inches of compost. This year, we have enough compost to deep compost. We are currently debating whether we need to completely rebuild up the beds or just add the compost to our flat/compacted beds and figure out something for the rain/flooding or something else. We aren't very professional and are new to trying to manage your garden properly. Any/all advice, greatly appreciated." End quote. Okay, awesome question. And if you'd asked me a few years ago, I would have not had a lot to really add to that. But boy, oh boy, do I now. Okay, so the first thing I would ask is if the beds are on a slope. If so, on poorly draining soils, I recommend pointing the beds downhill if they are not already. Otherwise, adding that compost is just going to result in the compost getting washed away in the next big rainfall. Now, here in Kentucky Zone 6B, I do like my beds raised a little bit, and definitely that is true as you go further north. The reason is that it helps them to warm up and dry out in the early spring when wet and cold is sort of all clay can really be. Of course, we're in a wetter climate too, where water is clearly not an issue. Well, definitely not in the spring. The drier and warmer you get, the lower to the ground you want to stay. So assuming that you're in a mildly wet climate that is roughly as cool as ours is, or it's slightly cooler, I would recommend mounding those beds a little bit and then adding your compost on top. And you mentioned not being professional growers, so would perhaps making like physical raised beds make more sense on your scale? That's something at least worth exploring. If wanting to stay in ground though, the reason I would recommend mounding is that it sounds like the beds have been somewhat worked on already with some compost, so that should help a little bit. Oftentimes people try to just pile compost on top of thick, poorly draining clay with no work on the soil before, and the results are, well, a pile of compost on thick, poorly draining clay. The roots of the plants definitely in that first year, but probably that first 18 months or so, just sink in the muck and will refuse to produce much, if anything at all. So yeah, it sounds like your decision really comes down to whether or not you need or want the beds off the ground very much. But I should just emphasize that raising the beds definitely helps with drainage, but it doesn't solve drainage. Unless you find ways to address the drainage long-term, it will likely always be somewhat of an issue. I've found that it's really hard to fix poor drainage issues just with your growing practices alone. Our farm is exceedingly poor draining, and I have tried every non-drain tile intervention I can think of. The results have been okay, but it's still a really tough farm to grow on. Forcing a farm is a tall task, and it can be done, certainly. And I would say most farmers have to force their farms because, you can't afford perfect land. Most of the perfect land in Kentucky has horses on it. So that's where we're at. We kind of have to get in where we fit in, and that makes it challenging. But for some people, it may take installing some drainage tile or French drains or whatever makes sense for you. Some intervention may just be necessary. or some diversion / capture if the water is coming down from a slope. Anyway, I hope that helps a little bit as you're heading into your growing season. Let us know what you all decide and how it goes. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, leaf mold. Be right back. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Farmhand. I don't know about you, but I got into farming to be in the field growing food for my community, not creating elaborate pack lists, not writing newsletters or responding to emails, not designing and maintaining web stores, and etc. And I especially don't enjoy doing those things after an already full and fulfilling day of growing food. Actually, if I spent less time on my phone and behind the computer, that would be great. If only there were a solution for that. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for farmers. With one single platform, Farmhand enables you to offload your administrative tasks, send and manage communications, and sell more to your customers. Farmhand saves growers an average of 6 hours of administrative load each week. That's 6 hours so you can get back into the field, spend more time with friends or family, or have a life outside of the farm, which is actually a thing. Think about it. What would you do with an extra 6 hours a week? Sign up for a free trial with the link in the show notes, because now is the best time to dial in those systems for the next growing season. Follow the Farmhand link in the show notes to learn more. All right, back to the show. Okay, so there was one other question from Super Thanks that I wanted to get to from @TonyMcCartney, who writes, quote, "Thanks, I love composting, worm composting, and making leaf mold. Thanks for the great content. Glad I found your channel. Perhaps you can talk about leaf mold if you haven't," end quote. Sure, Tony. I know that's not exactly a question, but I am happy to talk about leaf mold. I love leaves. Okay, so generally speaking, what we're talking about when we're talking about leaf mold is leaves that have been allowed to decompose into a nice, rich, composty substance as they would more or less on the forest floor, but like in a pile. Microbiologically speaking, leaves are hard or at least slow to break down and require fungi to really adequately decompose them, thus making the nutrients that the leaves contain more available to the soil. Leaf mold creation is a cooler process, like physically, like temperature-wise cooler, not like cool as in hip, but it's a cooler process than thermophilic compost, like hot composting, because fungi are just not as bonkers as bacteria and do not generate or operate as well at the same levels of heat. And by and large, I have no issues with leaf mold. In an ideal scenario, that is what I would prefer as my compost multi-layer, just all across our gardens. Just a thick layer of decomposed leaves. For the win, totally. This is because they come with fewer contamination risks, though not none, and I will talk about that momentarily. And they come with less risk of high phosphorus and other issues that normal compost comes with. However, because leaves are often scooped off the ground with mower catchment sort of situations, and because they do not break down at 130 degrees or more like most composts do, weed seeds are not uncommon in commercial leaf mold. So that can become an issue. As for the contamination part, it's possible that anything sprayed on grass or sprayed around the trees, like on a golf course or something, could find its way into the leaf mold and not decompose or be broken down as it would be in a commercial thermophilic compost. Also, there is a small but real risk from leaves grown in areas contaminated with lead or cadmium, which could bioaccumulate in the leaves. In other words, there is a small risk that you could import high levels of heavy metals that become concentrated in the composting process, which is not great. But the other somewhat annoying thing about leaf mold when used as garden amendment is that there isn't a ton of research on it. At least I find that annoying. In fact, I wanted to include more about the research on leaf mold, but I was reading a 2022 paper from Purdue University where the authors wrote, quote, "We were unable to find any scientific reports documenting the potential benefits or drawbacks of applying leaf mold amendment to soil," end quote, which was pretty much what I was finding. The study has lots of interesting tidbits about leaf mold, though, and that particular research demonstrated that, quote, "Amending soil with compost derived from leaves of local deciduous trees can result in an average increase of 60% in marketable tomato fruit yield," end quote. So that's pretty cool. Anyways, my thing with leaves is I prefer them in my other composts, like mixing them in there on my farm, just because I know that my source contains some weed seeds. Also, I love how worms will come into those piles afterward and really break everything down nicely while imparting all of their rich, wormy goodness, which is, I think, how the scientists would say it. But I would happily just use a straight leaf mold if possible, and also if I could trust the leaves were not contaminated or too weedy. Anyway, great questions and fun stuff. I'm going to wrap it up there for this Frigid Tuesday in Kentucky. Also, note that if you are a Major League Soccer fan, I am going to post a link in the show notes for you to join my Major League Soccer Growers Daily Fantasy League, which is, you don't have to know anything about soccer, but if you wanted to, this is your opportunity. Also, you can beat me in a game, which is also fun. Also, I know I talk a lot about the YouTube crowd because their interactions are the most visible for us, but you podcast-only folks are rapidly growing population, and I don't want you to think we don't love you, because we absolutely do. Podcasts are my jam. That's why I got into podcasting. We do and try to keep you all in mind when making these shows, so it's not just purely visual, that you're missing out on stuff. But if you in the podcast-only family ever want to comment on the show, you can hit up notillgrowers@gmail.com. We cannot respond to the amount of emails we get, but we will try and read them. And if I come across something that's helpful for the show, I will definitely include it. Anyway, before we go, I want to give one last shout out to the good folks at Rimmel Greenhouses for making this show and the amount of kale I've been able to eat through this weird winter we're having possible. Whether you're growing tomatoes for market, kale, flowers in the spring, or vegetables for your family, growing in a high tunnel protected from the weather provides the right environment for a harvest you can count on. Rimmel greenhouses are strong, durable, and easy to assemble, offering the quality you need to grow productively year-round. The team of experts at Rimmel Greenhouse Systems will be your trusted partners to ensure you get exceptional value from your greenhouse or high tunnel investment. Visit Rimmel.com today to get growing. Big shouts to all of our show sponsors. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and the team at No Till Growers for their support. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook by me, also out in German, Italian, and French. Or maybe it's not out in Italian yet. Soon in Italian. You can pick those up out in countries that speak those languages, or you can pick up the Seed Farmer by Dan Brisebois at notillgrowers.com. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of February, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to, our weeklies are back, Randall Duran, Alex and Oliver, Maina, Stacy Moorman, Bill King, Chris Yates, and Stephen Smith are... This week they've started a biker gang, of course, and but this one there is a little bit different. Like they all drive e-bikes, and their thing is kind of, instead of like, I don't know, whatever biker gangs do, they actually just go and like help people with their gardens, and you know, instead of leather they're wearing linen because it's hard to work in leather. But anyway, they actually, you would think they don't, you know, they get picked on by the other biker gangs, but they actually get a lot of respect, and it really comes down to that they just, of all the biker gangs, they grow the best tomatoes, and you'd be surprised, that gets you pretty far. So, yeah, lots of cred there. Anyway, thanks for watching and or listening. We will see you tomorrow for Wednesday. Yeah, why not?